Okay. We're going to be presenting our research, Katrina and I, on where we've explored the experiences of online creative arts educators through the lens of sociocultural theory. So just for context, we teach an arts course that covers all 5 areas of the arts curriculum. And in finding educators who were willing to be participants in this study, we were just looking for those who taught one or more of the art forms in creative arts curriculums. So we've titled our presentation using a quote from one of our participants. It's not as good because it's not together. So this sounds relatively negative. However, hopefully by the end of the presentation, you see how we're not going to stay in that negative sentiment. And it led us to envision something that we hope will provide positive future direction, which is our proposition of CoFlex learning. Oh, sorry, Katrina.
Okay. As we begin, Katie and I would like to add our voices to earlier acknowledgements of country and express our respect to the traditional custodians of the lands upon which each of us stands and elders past and present.
So on screen, we have a visual abstract, and this comes from our first paper, which is currently under review, so crossing fingers for us. So in today's presentation, we're going to share with you the context that led to our research and then an overview of sociocultural theory. Why did we use this? Why was it valuable in exploring arts learning online? And then we'll do, the traditional research paper where we say this is our methodology, here are our findings, but most importantly, our proposition for a positive response to the challenges and tensions that our research has identified. So I'm going to now invite Katrina to share that background to our research.
As arts educators ourselves, with experience teaching both face-to-face and online, this study was motivated by the tensions we had observed in our own practice between teaching and learning in these 2 very different environments. The goal of arts educators working within initial teacher education is to ensure future educators can facilitate meaningful creative arts instruction in their own classrooms. To do this, research indicates we must provide experiential opportunities for students to engage in artistic practice, assume the role of the artist, and acquire pedagogical and practical knowledge. Essentially, students must first encounter the collaborative, embodied, lived experience of making, sharing, and responding to art before they can then facilitate this same experience for their future students in a way that values the arts and arts education. The emergence of online learning, as we've heard today, understandably raises significant questions for arts teacher educators. How can you create a drama ensemble when you can't see each other? How do you undertake visual arts without studio materials? How do you explore environmental sounds when Zoom is designed to suppress them? These dilemmas are further pronounced when considering many students undertake online learning asynchronously, never sharing an embodied, collaborative or lived experience. As Avery, a pseudonym for one of our participants, stated, "I don't know what happens when I push a unit out into cyberspace. I have no idea how they connect." In this research, we set out to examine how arts teacher educators navigate and respond to the specific requirements of teaching the arts online, particularly considering how a sociocultural lens might provide insights for reconceptualising and delivering arts learning in digital contexts.
Okay, the nitty-gritty theory. Strap in. So we approached this through the lens of sociocultural theory, and many of you are familiar, most likely, with the work of Vygotsky, as well as other neo-Vygotskian theorists. So at its core, sociocultural theory views learning not as something that's transmitted from one personal source to another. It's co-constructed through participation in shared activity. So importantly for our study, learning is always shaped by where it takes place, who is involved, what tools are used. So from a sociocultural perspective, we understand learning is situated in context. It's socially mediated, and it's also mediated by various learning tools. So hopefully you're starting to see why this is valuable, and we saw it as valuable for understanding arts education, because arts learning is grounded in cultural and social contexts. It's embodied, it's collaborative, relational. It often takes place in shared physical spaces. And we've seen that repeatedly in a few presentations today. So if we drill down now into why these hallmarks are relevant, situated in context. First, in the virtual classroom, learning is sometimes characterized as faceless or placeless. So for us, questions arise about how can online arts learning effectively engage learners within their sociocultural contexts. Now, we're not saying it can't be achieved, but doing so requires deliberate pedagogical innovation. Second, socially mediated. Collaboration in online contexts has been identified as challenging. Specifically, teachers often, and this is broad studies too, not just the arts, talk about maybe unsatisfactory or inconsistent student engagement. So this has relevance in the arts where collaborative relational learning is central, and the challenges around that raise challenges for the online arts educator whose students aren't co-located, both in space but potentially in time if they're studying asynchronously. Finally, mediated via learning tools. Digital technologies are a newer mediatory tool. We're often told these are the answer to the challenges of collaboration online. However, there is limited research that we could find into how these learning tools, digital learning tools, are specifically leveraged in the arts. So it was actually a little in tension when we started this. Oh, how is that happening? So returning to our study, rather than just asking whether online learning is successful to teach the arts in a general sense, sociocultural theory allowed us to ask a more precise question: what happens when the social, the spatial, the embodied conditions of learning that are fundamental to the arts are reconfigured?
This qualitative study, undertaken with ethics approval, involved semi-structured online interviews with 12 participants, 8 of whom were Australian, 3 from the USA and 1 from Pakistan. Transcripts were analysed using Braun and Clark's 6-phase framework for reflective thematic analysis, with further details on the slide before you. From the very first interview, it was apparent that interviewees felt strongly about the research topic. They spoke with such affect and passion that their voices remain with us to today. Given our background as arts educators, reflexivity was central to our study, with additional layers applied to Braun and Clark's 6 phases to ensure rigour and trustworthiness. While moments of agreement and connection were inevitable, an intentional professional stance was maintained throughout in order to negate the potential for bias. Strategies such as temporal disjunctions, separate coding, and collaborative reviews supported methodological rigour and transparency, while ensuring participants' voices remained central to findings as they remain central to our presentation today. Importantly, the application of the sociocultural lens was intentionally reserved for stage 5 to privilege participant voices and ensure initial coding was inductively driven. Our aim was to understand what participants valued before interpreting their accounts through sociocultural theory. This process resulted in the development of 3 themes, which we will now explore.
Okay, so theme 1, the distinctiveness of arts learning. So in this first theme, we collated the consistent and heartfelt, and we really want to underline those words, expression across our participants that arts learning represents a unique learning domain. It's defined by embodied, situated, collaborative practice. So because of this, transferring arts pedagogy into online environments was not simply a technical challenge, but for our educators, a profoundly pedagogical one. They were clear that the arts are most powerfully learned in a shared space, where presence, energy, and relationships could be experienced in real time. One of our participants' thoughts were quite emblematic of what we heard across the group. We as arts educators believe through and through that being in the space with our students, you cannot get a better experience. So that idea of being in the space came through just again and again. The arts were described not just as cognitive, but lived and felt, that learning happens in the doing, in the body, and in interaction with others. And our participants also emphasised the importance of immediacy and responsiveness, of being able to read the room, respond in the moment, and adapt dynamically, fluidly. These pedagogies demand shared presence in many ways. So closely connected to this was that notion of the arts being relational. Our educators spoke about connection and collaboration and community as central to transformation in their students. We consistently heard of their determined efforts, however, to apply these practices online. However, there remained across the participants this shared sense of loss, and for some, we would even say a grief. They felt the richness of embodied experience and presence of collaboration was just all diminished. But holding that intention with the educators remaining deeply committed to sustaining the arts, expanding access through online learning. So what this first theme revealed then is a really powerful tension, a commitment to accessibility held alongside a sense that something essential to arts learning online is missing. So our second theme pertained to the fragility of the arts. Interestingly, while this wasn't in any way embodied in our research questions or our interview questions, it bubbled up. The interviewees repeatedly shared their perspectives about a long history of the arts being undervalued within education systems and society more broadly, ongoing cuts to programs and funding, and even cuts to national representation. So the move to online learning was voiced by some as yet another blow within a long history of onslaughts against the arts as a sociocultural institution. However, this perspective saw many participants exercising determination to overcome their perceptions of online learning as a threat to the unique nature of the arts. Numerous participants repeatedly expressed an imperative to continue teaching the arts online and, importantly, to teach them as authentically as possible within the space. So their belief was that in doing this, this was a way to ensure the arts remained a practice and a quality practice. As one of our participants explained, if they don't get any quality education or experiences in their university degree, and they may not have had any arts or quality arts education in their primary or secondary experience or outside of school, it's a missed opportunity. So this highlights for us a key concern. If the arts aren't taught well, we risk the loss of quality practice for future classrooms. So it's just important to note, though, that these kinds of determined sentiments weren't universal across our participant cohorts. Some really embraced online learning quite begrudgingly or out of necessity, with a recognition that failure to offer courses online led to loss of student enrolments to other universities. Some voiced concerns that this shift prioritised access and scale over quality and integrity. There was also a strong sense of uncertainty about the future. Some saw online learning as a way to sustain the arts, to broaden participation, and others feared it might contribute to a long-term dilution of arts education, particularly if pre-service teachers graduate without confidence or competence. So again, we're seeing a tension or a balancing act in this theme. Educators are holding together a recognition the arts are fragile, a commitment to maintaining authentic, high-quality practice, and a pragmatic acceptance of online learning as necessary, but also valuable. So it's within this tension that we begin to see the deeper challenges and the possibilities of arts teacher education online.
In the final theme, participants reflected on the online learning environment as a specific type of ecology containing three elements: educators, students, and EdTech. For educators, each of the elements within the ecology was agentic and codependent. It was this theme that we must reflexively acknowledge surprised us most. Instead of discovering the tools and techniques that made online learning of the arts authentic, we discovered a discordant ecology that was positioned as a stark contrast to the synergistic ecology of the face-to-face classroom. When discussing their own role, educators consistently recognised the influence of their attitudinal stance on the learning ecology. They articulated deliberate efforts to consciously develop enthusiasm for online learning. Educators also spoke of the role of students. They emphasised the online ecology made student engagement harder to perceive and harder to foster. Students were more likely to disengage and harder to draw back in when they did so. Notably, many educators echoed Sam's sentiment: students know they're missing out. EdTech, the third element in this ecology, was discussed least and mostly with ambivalence. While opportunities were acknowledged, more commonly technology was seen to introduce barriers to authentic arts education. Zoom frames minimised person, sound delays impeded demonstrations, and the cognitive overload of managing multiple digital elements was, according to Lee, like managing the UN. This theme revealed the discordant ecology of online learning. In the absence of shared spaces and immediate relational cues, educators perceived themselves as teaching alone. Students were present mainly through their absence, and EdTech, though recognised as an integral part of the learning ecology, provided an environment that was not yet capable of sustaining the collaborative, embodied and expressive qualities foundational to arts learning.
Okay, so how do we make sense of these insights and lift our spirits a little? Because it does feel a little bit doom and gloom, but let's briefly return to our aim. We wanted to understand how do creative arts teacher educators navigate the tensions of shifting their highly embodied, relational, studio-based practices into online environments, and what does a sociocultural lens have to offer in understanding what happens when the conditions that underpin learning are necessarily reconfigured. So we admit the findings did not match our expectations. We'd anticipated something different. Drawing on Braun and Clark's notion of identifying the story told by the themes, what emerged was not a story of innovation in the way we had hoped for or expected. We'd anticipated, as part of doing this project, that we would locate innovative practices, particularly EdTech practices, and then that participants had used with success that we could then share and scale. And instead, what we found was a much more complex picture, one of conflicted priorities across the core dimensions of sociocultural practice. And a clear tension also emerged, a wicked problem. While participants held a shared belief that online learning in the arts is not as good because it's not conducted together, therefore disrupting the sociocultural foundation of arts learning as situated embodied, they also largely advocated for its continuance based on a recognition of the value to the promotion of the arts as a fragile sociocultural institution. So this creates what we first felt was this impossible nexus, a need to provide accessible education while working within a medium that struggles to sustain the very conditions that define it. So rather than resolving this tension, our key insight is this: it must be embraced, because within this new tension, maybe new possibilities for learning might emerge.
We would like to conclude by suggesting one such possibility. We suggest current modes of hybrid and high-flex learning be re-envisioned so that instead of learners engaging in online and on-campus learning experiences, they engage in online and co-situated experiences. With these co-situated experiences more flexibly and authentically occurring within the student's own local community. We coined the portmanteau word CoFlex to describe this approach. CoFlex learning retains the accessibility of online learning while restoring the key sociocultural dimensions of arts learning by leveraging a new element in the learning ecology, students' own communities and the opportunities for arts learning within them. In CoFlex, educators design beyond online and traditional learning environments to create learning and assessment tasks that engage students in applied arts experiences in their own local communities, fostering an embodied, situated outworking of their online coursework. These collaborative engagements with community members would work in synergy with coursework, with peer and educator interaction, augmenting embodied experiences and online learning. We are currently working to envision what CoFlex learning could pragmatically look like and how it could embrace and extend similar approaches such as placement, service learning, or work integrated learning. For example, in CoFlex arts learning, students could take asynchronous field trips, each visiting their local galleries or performance venues or parkland, allowing students to then collaboratively reflect on shared but parallel and still co-situated experiences of the aesthetic. Students could even support a local arts group creating arts trails or designing a repertory theatre sets to embody course learning, such as understanding the elements and principles of design. Assessment could see students create a pop-up event at their local library, allowing them to understand what it feels like to present their work to a live audience. This proposed CoFlex approach retains the distinctiveness of arts learning, with learners no longer involved solely in isolated parallel participation, but in parallel communities of co-situated participation. This would allow learners to retain the benefits of online learning while still undertaking the co-situated, shared and embodied practices that educators in this study emphatically maintain are central to arts learning. Notably, CoFlex has the potential to reach further than the students. We see its capacity to positively contribute to communities. The arts themselves, represented by educators in this study as a fragile sociocultural institution, could have a greater capacity to thrive through the implementation of CoFlex learning and by having students and future educators contribute to and value community arts experiences.
So where to next? On screen, we have kind of the next steps in our project where we see it going from here. First of all, a scoping review to understand what is already occurring. This possibly is occurring already under different names in different contexts, and we're seeking to develop from that study a set of design principles as conditions of possibility for how we may implement it in our own context. From that, we also would like to then conduct an empirical study, maybe focus groups, interviews with students and current educators to understand structural, pedagogical, and sociocultural constraints. And then, of course, the really where we want to go is we want to be able to propose this to our own leadership, to be able to change our own programs and adopt CoFlex within our own context. Thank you so much for listening. We have our references on slide and invite questions now at this point in time.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting. And I think it is really interesting that you didn't find what you thought you were going to find, but in many ways that has pushed you to go further. So was it with the CoFlex, was it originally just for schools, or did you see it as part of community engagement when you set up the research?
CoFlex emerged from it. So it was certainly not on our radar at all when we started the project. So this is really situated within teacher education and our role as teacher educators, and how do we engage our pre-service teachers in embodied collaborative arts experiences. So CoFlex then emerged through that tension that arose.
Oh, that's interesting. And yeah, thank you.
So I think you can see why with your presentation we're really interested, because what you're doing is something quite similar, but not the same. And it would be really interesting, I think, for us to talk through our various contexts, the difference in our contexts, and what we could learn from you and your student motivations and things like that. Yeah.
No, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Hi, Siobhan.
Hi. It occurs to me that you might also be interested in having a look at one of the things that Victoria University does with our early childhood courses, which is we have a program in Playwork where we are actually getting students to learn about playwork, but their practical experience is going out and creating pop-up playwork experiences out in community. In parks all over Australia. And I think that has some elements of crossover with your idea of doing things locally and connecting with community. And so you might be interested in having a look at like the principles and how that's structured and where it overlaps or doesn't overlap with your CoFlex learning ideas.
Absolutely, Siobhan. One of the challenges that we've both envisioned is for students maybe who live in rural or regional communities where those kinds of events are harder to facilitate. So to hear about those experiences from you would be wonderful.
Yeah.
We will
I'm not personally involved, but I can hook you up.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, please.
Well, we have only 2 minutes left until our next presentation. So I'll stop the share and just invite any last minute questions before I invite our final presentation for this stream.